Don't embarrass the family." My mother's words cut through the lobby's glassy air like a blade dressed in pearls. She said it so casually, her hand lightly resting on my sister's shoulder, as if shielding her from a gust of wind rather than from me, the so-called shame they wanted to keep outside. I stood at the entrance of the Bellerose Grand Hotel in downtown Chicago, wearing a sleek black coat, the only thing left unstained by the cold rain that had caught me mid-block. But apparently, the water wasn't the thing making me unwelcome. It was me. And not just unwelcome, my sister, Samantha. Sam to the rest of the world, Queen Samantha to herself, had physically placed herself between me and the door like she owned it. She smirked when I stepped toward the glass. "Sorry," she said with a smile so bright it might have fooled anyone else. "This place is kind of exclusive." The doorman looked at her, then at me, confused. He recognized me. I saw it in his eyes, but he said nothing. Protocol. My mother stepped forward, then trench coat, barely buttoned diamonds flashing under the golden sconces. "Darling," she said quietly, almost sweetly, "let's not make a scene. I know it's hard not being part of things lately, but this is for your father. Don't ruin it." She lowered her voice even further, leaning in as if she were bestowing mercy. "You know how delicate things are with your father's heart." Her voice lingered on the word, "your," like I'd forfeited the right to belong to him. The ache in my chest wasn't new, but that day it felt surgical. This wasn't just exclusion, this was performance. The birthday dinner was happening inside my hotel, and they had no idea that the very leather chairs they were sitting on, the champagne chilling at the center of the table, the soft jazz playing overhead, the name Bellerose itself was mine. I had bought this building through a shell corporation 6 months ago, quietly, cleanly, deliberately. I hadn't changed anything about its public branding, hadn't even touched the guest-facing staff, but I owned every brick, every imported chandelier, every damn shrimp on the seafood tower my father was now carving into with a smile. And yet here I was, wet uninvited and being shushed like a scandal. "Sam?" "She's just trying to sneak in again," my mother whispered behind her hand. "Last time she made a scene at the brunch. Seeing that brunch had been the only time I tried to show up to something uninvited 2 years ago. I had brought a gift. No one opened it. No one saved me a seat. They hadn't even looked up when I entered. I remember standing there that day holding that ridiculous blue box with gold ribbon, my name clearly written on the tag. I remember watching my father kiss my sister's cheek and laugh like she was the only one worth remembering. I remember putting the box quietly down by the coat rack and walking out. They didn't even notice I had left. This time, though, I didn't come to offer anything. I came to witness. My mother turned away before I could say a word, patting her perfectly styled bob into place. She took Samantha's arm and walked back inside heels, clacking confidently, as if they had just done something noble. And I stood there, invisible. Again. Except this time, I wasn't alone. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. A text. "Chief Matthews. Confirming you're at the main entrance. Staff is ready when you are." I looked through the glass wall at the gilded lobby, the warm, amber tones of the bar, the concierge smiling politely as my mother crossed the floor like she belonged here. It was almost funny. Almost. I turned toward the security guard on standby. He had just stepped out of the staff hallway. He was tall, crisp suit earpiece. Matthews had picked him personally. His eyes met mine. "Ma'am," he said simply, "shall we proceed?" I could still hear the laughter from inside. I took a deep breath, adjusted the cuffs of my coat, and stepped through the revolving door like I owned the place. Because I did. But I didn't say that, not yet. Instead, I let the silence wrap around me like a second coat. Because silence was always how it started. I wasn't always the outsider. At least I don't think I was. There's this memory I come back to sometimes, me maybe 7 or 8 years old sitting at the kitchen table with a crayon in one hand and a drawing of a hotel in the other. It wasn't anything special, just a rough sketch of what I thought a castle for travelers might look like. I had labeled the front door "Welcome" spelled wrong and drawn little stick people waving. My mom had glanced at it, lips tight. She picked it up like it was something fragile and frowned. "Sweetheart, maybe draw something more. Normal. Like a family. Or flowers." I remember flushing red. My sister Samantha had just finished drawing a big tulip in a field, and my mom had already stuck it on the fridge with a smiley face magnet. Mine ended up in the trash, quietly, like it had never existed. That was the beginning, I think. The beginning of being overlooked, of being seen as odd, difficult, different. Samantha. She was the golden one. Piano recitals, ballet recitals, that award she got in 4th grade for most empathetic classmate. That one got framed and hung in the hallway for years. I remember staring at it when I was 15, wondering if I'd ever be worthy of a hallway spot. The first time I got straight A's, my dad looked up from his phone and said, "Good. Maybe you'll catch up to your sister." I never knew if he meant it as encouragement or a joke. It didn't matter, because the message had already taken root. You are second. Always. I got used to it. The silent expectations, the tiny digs, the way I could vanish in a room full of my own family and no one would notice. I learned how to slip into the background, how to shrink my voice, how to celebrate my own wins alone. I remember the time I won a regional hospitality competition in high school. We had to design a mock hotel brand from scratch, branding, budgeting, staffing. I spent weeks on it. My pitch presentation even impressed one of the judges so much that she offered me an internship on the spot. At dinner that night, I tried to tell them. My mother nodded absently while slicing chicken. My father said, "Just don't let it distract you from real life." Samantha asked if I'd help her pack for a dance camp that weekend. No one asked what my hotel was called. No one cared that I had designed a vision that someone thought was worth investing in. I remember lying awake that night, staring at the ceiling fan, spinning like an endless loop. That's what it was. Really an endless loop of not being enough. But the thing is, when you spend enough time being ignored, you learn how to build things in the shadows. You learn how to become whole without their applause. You learn that the deepest roots grow where no one is looking. Still, I can't lie. A part of me always waited for one birthday where the cake had my name on it, one graduation where they shouted louder than the rest, one hug where my mother whispered, "I'm proud of you," without comparing me to someone else. It never came. Even when I got into a top university for hospitality management on scholarship, they didn't come to visit, didn't attend orientation, just mailed a card with $50 inside and a note that said, "Do your best." No love. No warmth, just pressure. I learned how to cook ramen with a borrowed kettle and how to stretch $10 across 4 meals. I learned that dreams needed more than drawings. They needed patience and strategy and teeth. By 26, I was working 18-hour days managing a boutique hotel in Seattle. By 29, I was pitching redesigns to foreign investors who couldn't pronounce my name but listened when I talked. By 31, I was managing a multi-million-dollar renovation project in Dubai, quietly, successfully, and last year I bought the Bellerose Grand Hotel, in cash, through a holding company. No press release, no interviews, no applause, just the keys, just the deed, just me. And somehow, despite all of that, standing in front of my mother and sister that night, hearing them laugh at the thought of me not belonging, it still hurt. Because the wound doesn't care how successful you are. It only knows whether your mother ever truly saw you. The first thing I noticed when I stepped past the security guard and into the lobby was the coldness of the marble against my rain-damp heels. The second thing I noticed was that no one turned to greet me, despite being soaked from the drizzle, despite being in full view of the open archway where the event sign read, "Private Birthday Dinner, Bellerose Ballroom A." I was invisible. Or maybe I was just irrelevant. It's strange the things you pick up on when you're trying not to feel pain, the way the waitstaff avoided eye contact, The way the concierge stiffened slightly when I walked by like he wasn't sure if I belonged or not. The way the host at the ballroom entrance checked his list without even asking for my name. He didn't find it. Of course, I wasn't invited. "Sorry," he said, smiling tightly, already moving on to the next couple who approached. "This is a private function." I didn't respond, just stepped to the side, letting them pass. I was used to that, moving aside so others could shine. Inside the grand ballroom was dimly lit with hanging crystal orbs, casting warm reflections across the champagne glasses. The space looked beautiful, too. Beautiful, almost sterile in its perfection. Every detail screamed luxury, from the hand-stitched leather chairs to the gold-etched menus placed precisely on each table. I had approved all of it, quietly, remotely. I spotted my father at the center table, surrounded by family, laughing, clinking glasses. A large gold foil 70 balloon floated above his head. I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen him smile like that. Probably not since I was 11, when he used to drive me past hotels just to point out the ones he liked. And then I saw her, my sister. Samantha stood at his side in a crimson dress that matched her wine. She leaned in, saying something animated. Everyone laughed. She gestured grandly with a fork toward the massive centerpiece, an arrangement of white roses and calla lilies I had designed myself. My mother was seated beside her, adjusting her bracelet, glowing in the light of the chandeliers. No one looked at me. I was 5 feet from them, maybe less, but it felt like 100 miles. I started to turn, to leave. That's when Samantha noticed me. Her face froze mid-laugh, then curved into something amused. She tilted her head. Well, she said loud enough to catch the attention of several nearby guests, if it isn't the mysterious cousin from the basement. People chuckled, quiet, uncertain. "I was wondering if you'd try to sneak in again," she added, swirling her wine. "Figured the valet would have turned you away by now." My body stiffened, not from shame, but from recognition. This was a game to her, a stage. My mother turned slowly. She didn't smile. Instead, she whispered something under her breath I couldn't quite hear. But I read her lips. "Please don't embarrass us." The same phrase from earlier. I opened my mouth, closed it. What could I say that they'd hear? The host returned, confused now. "Ma'am, I'll have to ask." But then Matthews stepped forward. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He simply tapped the host's shoulder and said quietly, "She's not a guest. She's the owner." The host blinked, then turned, his mouth falling slightly open. I saw the ripple. Like a thread pulled taut across the room, people began to turn. First a waiter, then a cousin, then my Uncle George, who once told me at Thanksgiving that women shouldn't bother with business, they're too emotional. Samantha was still mid-sip when the silence settled. "Wait," she said, voice dry. "What?" And then I watched it click. She glanced around, at the staff, at the way the security team now stood subtly behind me, not beside her, at the way the general manager of the hotel, who had just entered through the ballroom door, walked directly toward me and said, "Ma'am, the suite is ready whenever you'd like to retire, and dinner will be sent up at your convenience." It wasn't loud, but it echoed. Samantha looked at our mother. Our mother stared at me like I had betrayed her simply by existing too successfully. And for the first time in my life, she didn't have anything to say. I didn't stay. Not for the cake. Not for the fake apologies I knew were coming. Not for the inevitable conversation where someone, probably Uncle George, would grab my arm and say, "You should have told us, we would have treated you better." I walked out before the second course was served. The rain had stopped, but the pavement still shimmered under the streetlights, catching hints of gold and gray, like bruises healing under the surface. I didn't go far, just 2 blocks up into a nondescript apartment above an old print shop. It used to be a temporary space back when I was still mapping hotel blueprints out on a card table and sleeping with my laptop on the floor beside me in case inspiration struck. I still kept it. Not out of necessity anymore, but out of choice. Because sometimes when the rooms get too bright and too polished, I need a place with cracked tile and peeling window frames to remember who I was, before the silence taught me to sharpen my edges. The door creaked like always. The hallway smelled faintly of dust and old coffee grounds. Inside, the furniture was mismatched. The floorboards complained under my boots. The single lamp near the couch flickered slightly when I switched it on. But it was mine. Entirely mine. I took off my coat, hung it carefully, and stood in front of the mirror above the sink. My reflection was tired, not just from the day, but from years of biting down words so hard they left scars on my tongue. I splashed water on my face, watching droplets trace the curves of my cheekbone, pausing like they too weren't sure where to go next. I sat down on the floor, not the couch, the floor, back against the cabinet, knees pulled in. And I breathed, long, deep, measured, in through the nose, out through everything I'd never said. It wasn't the moment I felt triumphant. It wasn't even the moment I felt relief. It was the moment I realized I didn't need their understanding anymore. But that didn't mean I wasn't still grieving it, because every time I walked away from a room like that, it felt like I was shedding a version of myself that still wanted to be loved, still wanted to be seen, still wanted to hear just once, "We were wrong and we're sorry." The silence in that little apartment was familiar, not comforting, but known. I got up after a while and made myself a cup of tea, one of the old herbal blends I used to keep in college, the kind that smells like lemongrass and dried patience. I sat by the window, sipping quietly, watching the blurred lights of passing cars below. I thought about how strange it is that you can build empires from the shadows, yet still carry the weight of being forgotten, like it's stitched into your skin. My phone buzzed again. It was a message from an old friend, one of the few who had seen me in my early grind days. "Leah, I saw a photo from the Bellerose tonight. Was that your family? You okay?" I stared at the message for a long time. I didn't answer. Not because I didn't appreciate her, but because I didn't know how to explain that yes, that was my family technically, and no, I wasn't okay. But also, I was, in a way I hadn't been before, because for the first time, I wasn't chasing a seat at their table. I was sitting at my own, even if that table was a cracked windowsill and a chipped ceramic mug filled with too hot tea. I reached for an old folder I kept in the drawer. Inside were sketches, hotel concepts from back in school, some of them yellowed with age. One of them, the very first one, the one I drew as a kid, the castle for travelers, the one my mom threw out. I had taped it back together once I'd fished it out of the trash. It had a coffee stain now, a smudge of ink, a rip down one corner, but it was still whole, still mine. I ran a finger along the lines. Then I whispered, barely audible even to myself, "Let them keep their dinner." I already own the story. The next morning, I didn't wake up to an apology. I didn't expect one. What I did wake up to was light. Warm, steady sunlight poured through the slanted blinds of the apartment like it had somewhere to be. It hit the wooden floor just right, painting long strips of gold across the faded rug and my half-finished mug of cold tea. I stood there barefoot, staring at it. Then, almost without thinking, I pulled the old folding table out from the closet, the one I used in college, when my desk was just a cardboard box and a prayer. I placed it in front of the window, sat down, opened my laptop, and typed one line into a blank document. Legacy means nothing if no one feels safe inside it. It wasn't for a press release. It wasn't for a pitch deck. It was just for me. Something had started shifting, quietly, without noise or fanfare, like a crack forming in the wall of an old house, not loud enough to alarm anyone, but undeniable if you looked closely. I spent the next few hours combing through old notes, concepts I had shelved years ago, ideas that felt too personal or too off-brand. One was a boutique hotel line that centered safety and autonomy for survivors of financial abuse. Another was a mobile shelter prototype designed like luxury pods, privacy, dignity, and warmth for people rebuilding their lives. I had buried those ideas under numbers and feasibility charts. Investors wanted safer plays, hospitality trends, marketable luxury. But now, I didn't care what they wanted. I was done building for applause. I wanted to build for impact. Later that day, I walked to the flower shop 2 streets over. I hadn't been there in months. The owner, Miss Ruth, still recognized me. "Haven't seen you in a while, sugar," she said, brushing soil off her apron. I smiled. "Been traveling, but I'm back now." She handed me a small pot of lavender. "This one's a fighter, nearly died twice, still came back." I didn't know if she was talking about the plant or me, maybe both. Back in the apartment, I placed the lavender on the windowsill, watered it gently, then stared at it for a full minute. I had never been the type to nurture things, not because I didn't care, but because I was too busy surviving. But this felt different, like maybe I could grow again too. That night, I got an email from a local nonprofit. They were holding a community panel on housing justice and were looking for business owners willing to speak. Someone had referred me anonymously. I stared at the email, reread it twice. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I opened the drawer and took out my childhood sketch again. This time, I pinned it above the folding table, right next to the window. Then I typed a reply to the nonprofit. Count me in. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't hiding. I wasn't shrinking. I wasn't hoping for someone to pull out a chair for me at their table. I was building my own. One story, one brick, one lavender bloom at a time. And even if no one else saw it yet, I did. And that was enough to begin. 3 months later, a local Chicago magazine ran a feature on the silent women behind the city's next hospitality revolution. They listed 5 founders. I was number 2. The article was respectful, well-researched, and surprisingly warm. They even included a quote from one of my earlier keynote speeches, one I had delivered at an Under the Radar conference in Copenhagen 2 years ago. It felt surreal seeing my words printed on a glossy page I hadn't paid to be in. I didn't frame it, but I did cut out the article and slid it into a folder labeled Reminders, right next to the old drawing of the Castle Hotel, right behind a printed email from a woman named Elena, who had once stayed in one of my converted shelters with her son and had written to say it was the first time I felt human in years. That one I read twice a week, not because I needed validation, but because I didn't want to forget why I kept going. That same week, I got invited to speak at a panel at Northwestern School of Hospitality. The chair told me, "We've followed your acquisitions quietly for a while. You're redefining what it means to build space with soul." I said yes. I wore a navy suit and soft brown shoes and brought a copy of that childhood hotel sketch with me. I didn't show it on stage, but it was folded in my pocket the whole time, like armor, like memory. I left the stage to a standing ovation, and when I checked my phone afterward, 2 texts, both from Samantha. "Samantha, did you see the photos from Dad's retirement brunch? You weren't there again. Anyway, I think you left some stuff in the attic. Want me to donate it?" No mention of the panel, no mention of the article, no mention of me. I stared at the texts for a full minute, then locked my phone and slipped it back into my coat. It still stunned me sometimes, how people could orbit the most important moments of your life and somehow never look up. How my family could be so aware of everything Samantha did, every yoga class, every catered brunch, every brilliant Instagram story she posted, and still know absolutely nothing about me. A week after that, I anonymously funded the startup costs for a small hotel-school hybrid in the South Side, designed by and for young women aging out of the foster care system. I didn't need my name on the building. I just needed it to exist. They sent me a thank you letter, handwritten. I opened it on a Friday night alone, curled up on my old velvet chair with the city lights blinking behind me. The last line read, "You didn't have to care, but you did. And now we do too." I cried, quietly, silently. Not because I was sad, but because it reminded me that sometimes The loudest love is the one with no microphone. A week after that, my mother called. I didn't pick up. She left a voicemail. Your cousin's wedding is in June. Samantha's maid of honor. We assumed you're not coming, but let us know if you want to send something. No, how are you? No, we saw your name in the paper. Just an assumption I wouldn't show up. And you know what? They were right. But not for the reason they thought. It wasn't because I was bitter or vengeful or still licking wounds. It was because I had finally built something bigger than their absence. A life, a purpose, a name. Even if no one in my bloodline said it out loud, I was no longer waiting for them to clap, because in the end, I learned applause doesn't build foundations, but silence. Silence teaches you how to pour concrete by hand. It started with a text from Samantha. The irony almost made me laugh. Samantha. Hey, I know it's been a while. Do you happen to know anyone at the Tribune? My fiance's company is launching a wellness brand, and we'd love a little press push. No explanation, no apology, just a smiley face and an ask. I stared at it for so long, my tea went cold in my hand. She had blocked me from our father's birthday dinner, mocked me at the door, told everyone I was trying to crash an event I had paid for, and now she wanted access to my network. I didn't reply. But she wasn't done. The next day, another ping. Samantha. I know things were weird at Dad's party, but can we talk? I think we got off on the wrong foot. Wrong foot. Like I had accidentally stepped on her Manolo instead of being humiliated in public. Still, I didn't respond. I thought maybe that would be it. It wasn't. 2 days later, my mother called. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail longer this time. Your father's been having some issues again. His blood pressure is high and the doctor said it might be stress-related. Samantha's been so busy with the wedding and we're stretched thin. We thought maybe if you're available, you could help out a little. You've always been the responsible one. That word, responsible. It stung more than I expected, because they had weaponized it for years, called me the stable one, the quiet one, the one who doesn't make drama. But what they really meant was, you can take the hurt. You can survive the silence. You'll be fine. They mistook endurance for agreement, mistook stillness for submission. And now that Samantha needed media access and my father needed bills paid, suddenly I was useful again. My stomach twisted. I went on a walk that evening trying to calm the burning under my skin. The streets were damp from recent rain, the city glowing gold and blue under passing headlights. I walked past my old favorite bookstore and paused outside the window. They were doing a poetry night. Inside, 20-somethings were sitting cross-legged on pillows, snapping softly after each stanza. And for a moment, I remembered who I used to be. The girl who thought she had to earn affection, the woman who worked 3 jobs to prove she mattered, the daughter who waited for her name to mean something in her own home. Not anymore. When I got back to the apartment, I opened my phone. I didn't text back. I didn't explain. Instead, I opened a new contact labeled Samantha, do not answer, and muted the thread. Then I opened my voicemail and deleted the message from my mother without listening to it a second time. Because here's the thing about people who only remember you when they need you. They don't deserve your attention when you finally don't. I pulled out the folder from the drawer, the one with the thank you letters, the magazine article, the sketch of my hotel dream, and laid it on the table. Then I opened my laptop and emailed the dean at Northwestern. Subject, re-mentorship opportunity. Confirmed, I told him I'd love to mentor 3 students from the upcoming cohort. Told him I'd even open a private tour at the hotel. The hotel. My hotel. The one they said I didn't belong in. I clicked send, then turned off my phone, and for the first time in years, I slept through the night without dreaming of empty chairs at family dinners, because I was finally done knocking on doors that only opened when I was needed. The invitation came through the hotel staff inbox. It was labeled Blake Family Private Event, Penthouse Reservation Confirmation. Underneath was a note birthday dinner for Mr. Charles Blake, hosted by Mrs. Meredith Blake and daughter Samantha Blake. Please arrange champagne chef's tasting menu and red carpet access. Please notify owner of the event per usual protocol. I stared at the name. It was my family. Again. Booking the Bellerose penthouse suite. Again. No call. No message. No acknowledgement. They didn't know still that every event they booked here ran through my office, that every tray, every room, every light dimmed to their liking belonged to me. They just thought it was convenient, luxurious, expensive. They never once stopped to ask how I fit into the equation. They assumed, as always, that I didn't. I approved the reservation, quietly, without a single change. Then I made a call to front of house. Just one note, make sure the owner's table is set tonight facing the skyline. I'll be arriving around 7:45. The evening unfolded like a scene from a play I had already watched before, same cast, same lines, same ending. I entered through the private elevator. The penthouse lobby was filled with golden light and soft music. Staff buzzed discreetly in the background. A harpist played by the window. The room smelled like white orchids and bergamot. My father was already seated at the head of the table, wearing a deep navy blazer. My mother adjusted his collar like she still owned every image the family projected. Samantha, in a silver gown, checked her lipstick in the back of her phone while talking loudly about her wedding planner. They didn't notice me at first. I approached quietly, dressed in black, simple, elegant, intentional. Then Samantha spotted me. She froze, fork mid-air. "What is she doing here?" she hissed. Before anyone could answer, the maitre d' approached. He smiled and gave a small bow. "Miss Blake," he said loud enough for every guest to hear, "we're honored to have you with us this evening." My mother blinked. "I'm sorry," what he didn't miss a beat. "The staff has prepared your table per standing instructions. Your suite is available as usual. If there's anything else you need..." That's when it happened. Samantha stood up, almost knocking over her glass. "You're mistaken," she snapped. She's not staying here." The maitre d' turned eyebrows raised, but still professional. Before he could speak again, the general manager approached. Then the head chef. Then my security liaison, Matthews. And finally the event coordinator. She was holding a clipboard checking names, flipping through sheets. She looked up at Samantha. "Actually," she said calmly, "Miss Blake here owns the building." The room fell completely silent. You could hear the chime of a fork hitting porcelain. And then Samantha laughed. She actually laughed. "You're joking," she said, looking around. This is some mistake. My sister can't even afford this place." I stepped forward. Just once. Just enough. And then the maitre d' turned back to the room, his voice cool and clear. They had no idea she owned the entire building. I let the words settle. Let them spread like ripples across polished marble. My mother's eyes widened slightly. My father looked down at his plate. Samantha stared like she had just seen a ghost. A very rich, very unbothered ghost. I walked past them then. No words, no anger, just grace. And took my seat at the owner's table facing the skyline. The staff poured my wine. The harpist shifted into something sweeter. And for the first time in my life, I was exactly where I belonged, without needing anyone's permission to be there. It didn't take long. The morning after the dinner, whispers started circulating among the hotel staff. Not malicious ones, just quiet astonishment. How could someone so invisible be so powerful? How had the family of the hotel's owner not known? Had they never looked her up? I didn't offer answers. I didn't need to. But the world, it answered for me. 3 days later, a local lifestyle blogger, one who had been invited to the Blake dinner as a guest of a friend, published a piece titled, "When the Forgotten Daughter Owns the Room." She hadn't spoken to me. She didn't have to. She just wrote what she saw, and the post went viral, not because it was scandalous, but because it struck a nerve. There was something poetic about it, a family so eager to curate perfection, so desperate to uphold their social status, that they failed to notice the most powerful person in the room had their last name and all the keys. Suddenly, reporters were reaching out. Requests poured in for interviews, comment collaboration. I declined them all. Silence was still my favorite language. But Samantha, she didn't take it well. She posted a frantic Instagram story the next night claiming certain people were spinning false narratives for attention. It was paired with a photo of her smiling over brunch, tagged unbothered. Except she very much was. Because within a week, one of her brand sponsors quietly pulled out of her upcoming launch event. Apparently, they preferred to avoid association with family drama. My mother sent me a voicemail I never returned. "You've made your point," she said, clipped and tired. "Can't we all just move on?" And then came the real fracture. A leaked email thread from a PR assistant revealed that Samantha had used Hotel Resources' My Resources for personal branding shoots over the past year without payment or formal approval. Someone inside had flagged the misuse. HR launched an internal review. She was issued a formal cease and desist letter from my legal team, not out of spite, out of policy. Meanwhile, a donor from Northwestern contacted me about co-funding a women-led initiative to reimagine urban hospitality. She said my name carried quiet weight. That phrase stayed with me for days. Quiet weight. I didn't need to shout anymore. Didn't need to fight to be seen. Because the truth was visible now in every closed door Samantha faced, in every event my mother wasn't invited to, in every whisper that started not with gossip but with respect. The scales had shifted, not violently, just permanently. My family hadn't collapsed in public disgrace. No scandal aired on daytime news, no shouting matches or lawsuits. They just faded, subtly, like a fog that used to choke you now lifted, and the people who once watched, silently, they began to speak. A cousin reached out. The quiet one, always in Samantha's shadow, too. She messaged me a single line, "I saw you at the dinner. I've never been prouder to share your name." I didn't reply, but I screenshotted it and saved it in the reminders folder right next to that old hotel sketch. Because even in vindication, I didn't need a throne. I just needed space. Space to breathe, to build, to be. And the ones who once locked every door I tried to walk through now stood outside knocking, but I had already built a life on the other side. It was a Tuesday morning, quiet, unremarkable, soaked in pale sunlight. The kind of morning that doesn't announce itself, just arrives like a breath you didn't know you were holding. I didn't have any meetings, no urgent calls, no press to manage, just time. So I walked down Lake Street, past the bakery where I used to buy discounted croissants before I could afford anything else. Past the old hotel with the flickering vacancy sign still somehow standing after all these years. And finally down a narrow alley that opened into a tiny public garden, one only the locals knew. It had a single bench under a tree that always bloomed late. A stubborn tree, I thought, blooming in its own time. I sat there for a long while. The air smelled like wet stone and wild mint. A few birds chirped in the distance, not urgently, just existing. And I did too. There was no celebration, no ticker tape parade, just silence. And in that silence, peace. A peace I hadn't known I needed. I pulled a small journal from my bag, leather-bound, slightly worn. I hadn't written in it in years, not since before Dubai, before the Bellerose acquisition, before I stopped expecting softness from the world. I opened it to a blank page and wrote, "I am not the sum of their silence." Then I put the pen down. Because sometimes surviving isn't loud. Sometimes it's sitting on a weathered bench, watching dandelions defy concrete. Sometimes it's waking up and making tea without waiting for anyone else to drink it with you. Sometimes it's knowing that your name doesn't need to echo in their mouths for it to carry weight. That afternoon I went home and watered the lavender on my windowsill. It had bloomed again, small, fierce petals against green stems. It wasn't showy, wasn't photogenic, but it was alive. So was I. I made pasta, for one. Read 3 chapters of a book I kept restarting for months. Fell asleep with the window cracked open, listening to the city breathe, not because I was healed, but because I was healing. And there's a difference. Healing doesn't mean it never hurt. It means it doesn't control you anymore. And for the first time in my life, I didn't crave their eyes. I didn't ache for my mother's approval, or Samantha's envy, or my father's reluctant nod. I didn't need to win them over. I had already won something far more valuable. Myself. It didn't come with applause. It came with quiet mornings and full lungs and rooms I didn't have to beg to be let into. And no matter what anyone else said, I knew I was free. There's something I never told anyone, not even Leah, not the dean at Northwestern, not the journalists who tried gently and not so gently to pull a soundbite from me about the family fallout. I never told them that I knew. I always knew. Every time Samantha mocked me for being quiet, every time my mother tilted her head in that disappointed way, every time my father changed the subject, when I spoke about my work, I knew they didn't see me. But what they didn't know is that I recorded everything. Not for revenge, not to leak, not to humiliate, but because years ago, when I first started building my career from scratch, I promised myself something. Never let anyone gaslight you out of your own reality again. So I kept emails, screenshots, audio files of conversations in which I was belittled, erased, dismissed. I didn't obsess over them. I didn't replay them late at night like a martyr looking for justification. I just kept them, like a record, a ledger of silence. One file in particular still sits in a folder labeled Inheritance. It's a voicemail from my mother left years ago when I was starting the acquisition of a small property near Lake Geneva. Her voice is sharp, disdainful. You'll embarrass yourself if you keep chasing these projects. Leave business to people who understand it. You're not built for that world. I never replied, but I kept it. Because that message was the moment I decided I'd never again ask her to see me. I didn't delete it after the Bellerose reveal, didn't even re-listen to it. I just moved it to a USB drive. That USB sits in a velvet-lined box in my apartment, along with a copy of my first business license, a faded boarding pass from my first international deal, a photo of the lavender plant in full bloom, and a letter, not addressed to anyone, just titled, Proof I Existed. Not because I need it now, but because I once did. That version of me, the one who sat in hotel lobbies sketching floor plans on napkins, who cried in stairwells after being told she was too ambitious, who lowered her voice to avoid offending her sister's delicate ego, that girl deserved a witness, and I was it. I never planned to share the recordings. I probably never will. But knowing they exist, it reminds me that I wasn't imagining it, that the pain was real, and that I survived it. So when people ask me how I stayed so calm during the dinner reveal, how I didn't gloat or lash out or even flinch, when Samantha sneered in front of our father, I smile politely. Because I had already played that scene in my head 1,000 times. The only difference was this time. The whole room saw what I always knew, that I was never the problem. I was just inconvenient to their illusion, and that illusion shattered beautifully. Sometimes the cruelest betrayal isn't an explosion. It's the slow drip of invisibility. It's being talked over, passed by, forgotten in group photos, left off invitations. It's being erased not by force, but by indifference. And when that erasure comes from the people who share your blood, your name, your history, it cuts differently. I used to think I needed to be louder, to wear my accomplishments like armor, to build skyscrapers so tall they couldn't help but notice, to earn a headline, a degree, a penthouse suite, all in the hopes that maybe someone at the dinner table would finally look up and say, "We see you." But they didn't. And eventually, I stopped building for them. I started building for the girl who sat on her childhood bedroom floor redrawing hotel plans that no one ever praised. I started building for the woman who survived disappointment after disappointment without turning cruel. I built for the version of me that never stopped showing up even when the rooms made her feel like she didn't belong. And somewhere in that process, I found peace. Not because they changed, but because I did. Because I stopped measuring my worth by their silence. Because I realized you don't need a seat at their table if you've built your own skyline. My mother still doesn't understand what she lost. Samantha still believes I got lucky. My father still calls me practical in that backhanded way, as if logic is a consolation prize. But none of that matters anymore. Not because it didn't hurt, but because it doesn't define me. Pain shapes you, but it doesn't get to finish your story. Only you do. So now I drink my morning coffee by the window of a home I bought without anyone's help. I walk into buildings that used to scare me. I mentor girls who've been told they don't belong in rooms with chandeliers and title cards. I sign contracts under my own name, and I never lower my voice. I don't need their applause. I am no longer their secret. I am my own arrival. So to you reading this, listening to this, maybe still holding your breath around people who claim to love you but only see fragments, you are not broken. You are not invisible. You are not asking for too much. And you don't have to shrink to make others comfortable. If your family can't see you, build something that does. And if they laugh at the door, just wait. They might not know it yet. But you own the whole damn building. Have you ever been excluded by your own family only to rise without them? If you feel like sharing, I'm listening. Tell me, if you had the chance, would you walk back through that door or build something better?